This is lesson number 5, the war zone. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Full of hope. Well, in this lesson, we'll be looking at what these ancient manuscripts teach regarding the origin of evil and why it exists. In our last lesson, we looked at the predictions that Jesus made regarding how the world would end. We saw that in these ancient manuscripts, Jesus claims that when he comes back, he wants to take his followers to a place prepared for them. Now, do you remember the 4 characteristics of his return? We saw it would be visible, physical, audible, and literal. We saw how that these manuscripts talk about 2 groups of people. Jesus uses the term to describe evil and righteous. But how did we end up with an evil as an option? When God describes himself, he describes himself as righteous. When he describes what he wants his followers to be, it's righteous as well. So where did this evil come from? Well, that's the subject of this lesson. In his book, The Lucifer Principle, Howard Bloom said, evil is a byproduct, a component of creation. In a world evolving into ever higher forms, hatred, violence, aggression, and war are a part of the evolutionary plan. Obviously, Howard is an evolutionist, but is there any truth in this statement? No one can deny that there's hatred and violence and aggression and war all around us. But is this just an intended and inevitable part of life on this planet? Or is this foreign to our intended existence? Are things really supposed to be like this? Have you ever wondered why hatred and violence and evil exist? Who or what is responsible for it? Did God create a devil? Or is Howard Bloom correct when he argues that evil is just a part of the evolutionary plan? If God is so good, then why does the world seem so bad? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there any need for sin, pain, and suffering at all? This planet is right in the heart of a war zone. The ancient pagan religions saw their world in 2 halves, good and evil, light and dark, life and death, masculine and feminine. Their gods and goddesses would maintain some sort of global harmony through the keeping and balancing of the power between these 2 forces. The East has the yin and yang, 2 opposites but complementary and interdependent forces. According to Barna Research Group, Western societies are also embracing the darker side. The practices of Wicca, or sorcery, are quickly growing throughout the United States and Australia, particularly among a younger people. The National Census data indicates that the nature religions, or the pagan religions, are among the fastest growing religions in our country here in Australia. So, is it safe to desire a balance between good and evil? Should our spirituality include some association with darkness? Is the devil real? If so, is he dangerous? This lesson is kind of a part 1 to these questions. Our next lesson, Does God Care?, is part 2. But right now, we'll take a behind-the-scenes look into the cosmic conflict. And according to these ancient manuscripts, it's been raging for thousands of years. So to get started, let's ask the obvious question. Where did sin begin, according to these manuscripts? Let's start by looking at the clue in the Greek New Testament book of 1 John. In 1 John chapter 3 verse 8 it says, "He who sins is of the devil, for the devil sinned from the beginning." According to the scriptures, sin began with the devil. Evil's not just a force or a part of nature or an aspect of human consciousness. Evil emanates from the devil himself. You know, many picture the devil as a mythical cartoon character with hoofs and horns and a pitchfork which he uses to roast and toast his victims for all eternity. But according to these ancient manuscripts, the devil is real. Now, the name devil is mentioned over 60 times in the Bible, while Satan, another name for the devil, is mentioned over 50 times. According to these manuscripts, he is real. Now, we've seen with prophecies and predictions, symbols are a key to communicating a message across cultures, civilizations, and time. And with this character of the devil, it's no different. There are a number of symbols that the Bible attributes to the character of the devil. In the Greek New Testament book of Revelation, we read in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9, "So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan." Notice the devil is called the great dragon. He's dangerous, deadly, and a formidable opponent. The devil's also described as a serpent or a snake, a clever and crafty animal. He sneaks up on you with a venomous bite. Interestingly, in many of the pagan cultures, the dragon and the snake have been key focuses of worship. Their symbols can still be seen today. Now, we find in the Hebrew Old Testament book of Isaiah that this devil actually has a name. In Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12, we read, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" Satan was originally called Lucifer, or the light bearer or morning star. This is very different from his name now, the devil, which means an adversary or an accuser. In the Old Testament Hebrew book of Job, chapter 1, verse 9 through 11, we get more insight into how this devil actually works. But we'll look at some of this in another lesson. So the question begs to be asked, did God create the devil? Well, this is a fair question. Some suggest that we're just some sort of pawn on a cosmic chessboard and God's like the master chess player. They even suggest that God created good and evil and then he had us choose in between the two. But this isn't exactly what these ancient manuscripts teach. In the Hebrew Old Testament book of Ezekiel, we read in Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 15, "You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created till iniquity was found in you." Lucifer was created by God as a perfect angel. His hometown was heaven. It seems that he was gifted in music and held a leadership position among the other angels. Lucifer was stunning and beautiful, and we're told that he was bright and had perfect wisdom. Now, as God is love and does not want to be worshipped and obeyed out of force or fear, he desires his beings to be motivated by love as well. Now, God could have created Lucifer as a robot, but robots can't love or make moral decisions. So God gives Lucifer a free will to choose his own direction in life. God does the same thing with us today, and we'll talk about that in a future lesson as well. But as many a philosopher has said, there is great risk in love. In fact, ask any parent. They're not certain if their children will grow up to obey or to disobey, but they take the risk anyway because, for the most part, they want someone to love and to be loved. Lucifer chooses to rebel against God's love. He chooses evil over good. As a result, an angel becomes what the Bible calls a demon. So God did not create a devil, God creates a perfect being who makes himself a devil. So, if God didn't create an evil devil, but a holy angel, then what was this original sin that Lucifer committed? Notice in verse 17 of Ezekiel 28. "Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor." Lucifer became proud and selfish. He saw his beauty and goodness as something to be worshipped, and he wanted to be like God. He was jealous of God. He wanted the other angels to worship and obey him instead of God. We get more of an insight from the Hebrew Old Testament book of Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 13 and 14, we read this, "For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High." Lucifer began to wish that he was worshipped instead of God. He wanted to be in the place of God, to be adored by all the heavenly host instead of God. He wanted to be like God. Even today, at the heart of virtually all evil is pride and selfishness. It's interesting to note, at least in English, that the middle letter of sin, pride, and Lucifer is I. It was Lucifer who began sin with a love of self. So do these ancient manuscripts explain what happened in heaven when Lucifer opposed God? Well, we find another snapshot of this in the New Testament book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. It's hard to imagine a war in heaven, but this is what happened when the devil fought against a loving God. And this conflict is the central issue of the entire ancient manuscripts. Good versus evil, truth versus lies, Christ versus Satan, love versus hate. Even though Satan lost the war in heaven, the conflict continues, and now we are in the middle of it. Now, the heart of this war was, and still is, the issue of worship. You see, we're the happiest when we're worshipping only God. After all, that's the natural order of things, and we'll learn more about that in upcoming lessons. When Jesus came to earth, the devil failed in his attempt to get Jesus to worship him. You can read about that in Matthew chapter 4, verse 8 to 11. Now that Jesus has left, the devil turns his attention to us. The last great conflict on the earth will once again revolve around worship. God is calling the world to a loving worship of Him as a creator God, while the devil's final attack will be to force people to worship Him or risk being killed. We'll see that in more detail on our lesson regarding the mark of the beast. Now, this passage goes on and states that the devil is not alone in this great controversy. Notice verse 9. So the great dragon was cast out, and his angels were cast out with him. The devil was so clever in his deception that 1/3 of the angels joined forces with him against God, and they are cast out of heaven with him. It's unknown how many angels there were, possibly billions or even trillions. But these angels become what we know now as demons or fallen angels. Now, these demons still work as agents for the devil today. We read about that in Revelation chapter 16. So we have a picture that sin began with a single angel rebelling against God and His kingdom. But now he's joined with more of these created beings, which means that God has a real problem in the universe. So this is normally at the point that most people ask the question, why didn't God just destroy the devil and these angels and be done with evil? The key to this question is in the Greek New Testament book of 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. It reads, "He who does not love does not know God, for God is love." Because God is love, He wants us to worship Him out of love. When Lucifer sinned, God could have destroyed him immediately. That would have solved the problem for a little while. But the remaining angels who knew nothing about the nature of sin, they would start to serve God out of fear, not love. They'd always have wondered if the devil's claims against God were true. So God chooses another option. He puts His character on trial before the whole universe. He's allowed the devil to demonstrate the results of sin so that everyone could see that God is love and worthy of worship, while the only outcome for sin is pain, heartache, suffering and death. This world is now center stage for this great drama, and we can see all around us the terrible results of evil. The major objective for God during this time is to save as many people as possible, eradicate sin from the planet, and ensure sin will never rise a second time. There's actually an Old Testament prophecy in the book of Nahum, chapter 1, verse 9, which promises that sin will never rise a second time once it's dealt with. But the question still remains, how did our earth get involved with sin, with Satan and his rebellion. After all, it starts in heaven. How did it get to earth? The first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, in chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, communicates an account of a serpent, which we've seen is another name for the devil. This serpent deceives the woman who we later to know to be Eve. And in verse 13 we read these words, "And the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.'" The devil and his angels were cast to the earth. As a result, he focused his deceptions on human beings. God created Adam and Eve as perfect beings. In fact, they were a perfect couple in a perfect environment with a perfect God. Like Lucifer, Adam and Eve were given free choice to decide between good and evil. God gave to Adam and Eve the most beautiful garden, plenty of friendly animals, a personal friendship with each other and with God himself. However, he asked them not to touch or eat from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This was a test of worship and obedience. The devil used the serpent as a medium to deceive Eve into disobeying God. Eve chose to trust her feelings and the word of the serpent instead of the word of God. Now, even though that account was a long time ago, these ancient manuscripts indicate that this devil hasn't finished his attack or hatred just yet. In fact, back in the book Revelation, chapter 12, verse 17, we get another insight. "And the dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war with the rest of their offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." The devil has now turned all of his attack on the woman, a symbol of God's church. You may have heard the phrase, "fights like a devil." Well, the devil is now fighting against God's last day church or last day people. This true church comprises those who keep the commandments of God and believe completely in the testimony of Jesus, which is a phrase that indicates the great prophecies of the scriptures. So in other words, the devil has got it in for us, the people who want to go back to God. So what's the major goal then of the devil? Well, Jesus gives us a clue in the New Testament book of John. In John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus says this, "The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly." The main aim of the devil is to rob you of life. He attempts to make you miserable, to inflict pain and discouragement upon you, to get you to give up, through breaking up your friendship with God. In doing this, he's also robbing God of those who would otherwise have discovered and followed him. The devil opposes God, and he wants to take as many as he can away from following him. In contrast, Jesus came to give you life, abundant life, full of satisfaction and enjoyment. But Satan would have you and me believe that God is unfair and does not want the best for you. You'll notice that many people who say that they don't believe in God are the first ones to blame him when something bad happens. So we know that the devil doesn't like people, period. And he especially doesn't like people who want to restore their relationship with God. And we've seen that he is waging war against them. But what's the major weapon that he uses in this war? In John chapter 8, verse 44, we find that Jesus taught that you are of your father the devil. There is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. The devil is a liar. The great conflict between Christ and Satan is not a war of power. It's a war of truth versus lies. In fact, the original Greek, where we read this word, "there was war in heaven," that word war is derived from a Greek word which literally means in English, politics. And so much of this war is based on the war of arguments or the war of ideas. And the devil's greatest weapon is the mixture of truth and error, which always leads to deception. which creates an interesting problem because the devil can appear to be good while being, well, a devil. Notice this caution that comes from the Greek New Testament book of 2 Corinthians. In chapter 11, verse 14, we read, "And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light." The devil is most dangerous when he's good. He becomes a Christian double agent to deceive Christians. This is why we need to be careful to ensure that we trust only the written word, not just what we see or feel or experience. Notice some of the examples these ancient manuscripts give as warnings as to what the devil's key tactics are. He misquotes the Bible in order to deceive. We find that in Matthew chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. He persecutes God's followers, or church, to discourage their faith. Revelation 12:13. He performs miracles to deceive into false religion. Revelation 16, verse 4. He works through the impersonation of false pastors to deceive. 2 Corinthians 11:13-15. He brings pain and disease to discourage and blame God. Job chapter 2, verse 7. He uses demon possession to take full control of someone. Luke chapter 13, verse 16. And he traps us into sin. 2 Timothy 2:26. The devil knows the value of effective communication. He attempts to wipe out all communication lines with God by influencing us to neglect personal prayer, meditation, and Bible study. He then opens up his own communication channels through what we see and hear and feel, primarily through things like media. You know, many movies and television and programs and books and internet sites and magazines, they do a great job at deceiving us into thinking and believing the devil's lies about God and the big issues of life. So is there any hope in any way that we could resist or overcome this devil? Well, the New Testament book of James gives us a key. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Do you notice the order here? Some often try to resist the devil in their own strength without first submitting to God. Remember, Satan deceived 1/3 of the holy angels, so he's a formidable foe. Notice it says to first submit, then resist. Only when we resist in the power of God can we overcome this devil. The second key is found in the New Testament book of Ephesians, Ephesians chapter 6. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. It's vital that we overcome the devil by making the right choices and asking God for power. Firstly, we need to submit or surrender our lives to God. Then we need to say no to the devil. We need to face the devil head on. Notice that none of the armor mentioned in the book of Ephesians is placed on the back. It's all on the front of us. Jesus resisted the devil by facing the devil head on, using the power of these ancient manuscripts which claim to come from God. We cannot overcome the devil by our own efforts. We need to ask God for this supernatural power for victory. So, does this devil have an end? Well, modern pop culture would have us believe that the devil has always been and will continue to always be some sort of dark overlord of the underworld, a place of torment. But what do the ancient manuscripts actually teach? Well, Jesus taught us in the Greek New Testament book of Matthew, chapter 25 and verse 41. Then he will also say to those on his left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Although Satan is a cunning adversary, we have to remember his fate is sealed. He's already defeated, and he knows it. For those who want to mix the dark life with their everyday life, the warning is given that the devil and all that is associated with him will be destroyed. The mystery of the dark supernatural may appear attractive, but the destination for such an association is clear. But The remarkable thing is that we also get a snapshot from these ancient manuscripts as to how God feels about the destruction of the wicked. Notice what the Hebrew Old Testament book of Ezekiel states in chapter 33, verse 11. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn from your evil ways, for why should you die, O house of Israel? The heart of God must have been wrenched when Lucifer rebelled. God loved him and did all he could to influence him to turn from his evil ways. Today, God loves you also. He loves me. No matter what choices we've made in our lives, he still loves us. He knows the end result of evil is destruction, so he pleads with each one of us to turn from our evil ways and to worship him. He knows that only then will we discover true peace and happiness. So we've seen that God created a perfect angel named Lucifer. But with his gift of freedom of choice, he chose selfishness over selflessness. He chose rebellion over loyalty, sin over righteousness, which led to the start of a cosmic conflict, a war in heaven, where a third of the angels sided with him, and his rebellion against the government of God, and that rebellion has made its way down to earth. And through the art of deception, humanity has sided with that rebellion. The fate of his rebellion is destruction, and yet in God's heart, according to these ancient manuscripts, he wants to offer a way of salvation to anybody who desires it. So, in summary, there are 3 things I want you to remember from this lesson. Number 1, God is a God of love who created beings with the power of free choice, including Lucifer, who chose to become a devil. Number 2, the reason we have suffering, pain, and death is due to the evil of Satan. Satan would have us believe that this pain, death, and suffering is a manifestation of the true character of God. And to be honest, he's done a very good job at causing the masses to blame God for everything that's gone wrong in this world. And number 3, these ancient manuscripts foretell that the devil will be destroyed and sin will never return. Well, now I want to hear from you. In our next section, I'll be asking you 4 reflection questions. So when you're ready, click next.